Okay, shooters and reloaders out there, Fortune Cookie 45LC coming to you from the Hot Lead Zone. And I was going to go to the range today, but it's more important to get a follow-up video out on my Model 25 5 Smith & Wesson revolver, because this revolver chambers 4.54 Casull rounds without any problem at all. And we need to go ahead and give you some more information on that. This is an unsafe condition. Well, certainly we're not supposed to use incorrect ammo. We're supposed to know better to not put 4.54 Casulls in this. After all, it's a 45 Colt revolver. Now, however, as you know, the gun manufacturers chamber the cylinder so that it can only accept 45 Colt rounds, so that in the event that we mistakenly, unexpectedly, unbeknownstly try to chamber a longer, more powerful round, we can't get it in there. And that's to help protect us from those moments when we might make an accident, because such events can happen. So, take for example, this is my 45 Colt Ruger, one of my Ruger 45 Colt cylinders. And you see, if you take that 4.54 Casull ammo and you try and chamber it, it won't go in. It's short by about 1/10 of an inch. And what that means is you can't get the ammo in there. No matter how hard I push that, it won't go in. So you push it and it comes right out. This ammo can't work in the 45 Colt cylinder by Ruger. And if you take one of my Berettas in 45 Colt, you try and chamber that round and it's short, it won't go in. So you try and get it to work, and if I try and advance the cylinder, it gets jammed in there. So you see, it doesn't, and then the ammo just drops right out. You can't shoot 4.54 Casulls by accident in a Beretta 45 Colt handgun. They do that on purpose, because they're supposed to be that way. And Ruger is the same way. You try and chamber, and it just won't go in. It won't accept the rounds. So you try and put that in there, your gun won't work. Now, some of the questions I got, some comments, which are all good questions, by the way, is, did you try other 4.54 ammo in this gun to see if only those big wad cutter rounds will chamber? So let's take this 4.54 Casull ammo. It's got a nice round nose flat point bullet. Drop that into the chamber and it just goes right in. You see, it'll fire. It's almost like this revolver is a 4.54 Casull revolver. But don't make any mistake about it. This is only rated for 17,000 to maybe 25,000 PSI max. It will not take the Casull round, which at full load is 65,000 PSI. Dick Casull made this round to compete with the pressure of Magnum rifles. So you fire a 65,000 PSI round in this thing, you got trouble. And suppose you put 6 of those in there, and then you touch that thing off. What'll happen is, at those pressure levels, the top cylinder will blow. And when it does, the 2 chambers on both sides will also blow. You'll have 3 rounds going off. The top strap will actually completely disassemble itself off the revolver. And that's what will happen if you try and shoot that in this gun. One moment you got a beautiful 45 Colt double action revolver, and the next moment you got a piece of scrap metal. Fortunately, when it does blow, all that shrapnel goes in an upward direction, and it usually causes no injuries, but you definitely would not have that kind of event happen to you. So let's even sweeten the deal a little bit more. Here you see a round that is very similar to, say, a factory 4.54 Casull round. This happens to be a reload though, but it has a jacketed bullet. It's the Hornady 250 grain jacketed XTP bullet. This would be very similar to what a factory round would be. I don't have any factory rounds because they're so expensive. But that just drops right in. You see? Just let it drop right in by itself. The cylinder closes and it functions. Which means you can fire a factory Corban or double tap or any of your buffalo bores will all be fireable in this revolver. That's a disaster. Now, some of you have read that a lot of Smith & Wesson Model 25s have oversized cylinder throats. Like 4.51, 4.52 is commonly the diameter of bullets that we would use for this gun. And oversized throats would have cylinder throats. In other words, this opening here on the cylinder, that opening would be bigger than 4.51, 4.52. So you would have an oversized cylinder throat. Well, turns out that this revolver does not have oversized cylinder throats. I mic the cylinder throats at .450 for all 6. And that's a small cylinder throat. Give you an idea, because a lot of you don't like the idea of using a caliper to measure the cylinder throat because pin gauges are the way to go. Well, no argument about that. Of course, pin gauges are the way to go. We don't have any of those. But I do have a pin gauge here. It's called a 4.51 45 ACP bullet. Okay, the 4.51 Sierra bullet, drop that in there like a pin gauge and it doesn't go through. It starts to go through but doesn't fall through. The reason why is a 4.51 will not go through a 4.50 opening. And that's true for all 6. I'll just do another one here, random. You see? It goes through a little tiny bit more, but doesn't go through. That's because these cylinder throats are 4.50, not the 4.51 pin gauge. Now, I'll give you a little more information. The 4.50 cylinder throat goes all the way back to where the case cylinder, the end of the brass casing is supposed to be. So this nose here is .444 in measurement. So .444 should easily go into a .450 cylinder throat, don't you agree? And indeed, it does. You see, it sticks right in. And it drops right back out. Now, take one of our nice powder-coated bullets, and that adds 0.02, so this is .446. And that should still go into a 4.50 cylinder throat, don't you think? When this goes in, it'll be able to go into that cylinder throat. And you see, it just drops right in. In fact, it functions. And the round drops right out. To show you how that looks in there, that's a pretty impressive bullet in there. Rounds drop right back out. So you see, it's a 4.50 opening, and there's a 4.44, well, 4.46 bullet nose there. Now, interestingly, if you take the front of your barrel, what you have here is a 449 groove diameter, and that means if you subtract .006 for the depth of the rifling, the bore diameter is around 443. Well, this is 444. So when you try and put that in there, You see, you can force the 444 bullet nose into the 443 bore diameter. If it were more than that, you have a harder time forcing it in, but thousandths of an inch, you can force that in easily. It might even be 442 because it's a little snug. But that gives you an idea of what the bore diameter and the groove diameter is on this revolver. And no, the round nose flat point in the 454 Casull doesn't go into a Ruger cylinder either. So it's not just the big wad cutter that won't go in. And now you see here, the powder coated doesn't even go in because the powder coated bullet gets snagged in the cylinder throat of the Ruger. But same thing with the Beretta. You take the 454 Casull ammo that has a round nose flat point bullet in there, try and drop that in there, and you can't close. It doesn't work, but the round falls right back out. Not so. You can put all these in, all these Casull rounds in, whether it's powder coated, whether it's wad cutter, whether it's round nose flat point, and that thing will shoot like it was made for them. Those rounds just fall right out. So the problem is this. When Smith & Wesson made this gun in the 80s, the 454 Casull had been around since 1957, 1959. And the Casull was picking up a lot of popularity, but it didn't become mainline in a factory loading until later on. But still, there was so much work being done with lengthening cartridges back in the time this gun was made that being able to chamber a longer round in a 45 Colt would not have been considered to have been an ideal situation, not even a good situation for shooters to have. So Smith & Wesson has no excuses on doing this. And they're supposed to know their product, right? For best safety first and performance second. Quality would be third. But you gotta be safe, you gotta shoot well, and then good quality. I think what happened is this. The chambering of these rounds is because the length of the chamber allows the brass to go in. And it's really not the cylinder throat. Now, if the throat were too small and a bullet jams into the throat, then the round won't chamber either. But we can see that that's not the problem because the 450 cylinder throat will take any of these bullets without any problem. So what Smith & Wesson did was this. They made the cylinder, the stop in there, long enough so that if you try and put a regular 454 Casull brass, an empty brass casing that's been sized properly, you try and chamber that and it doesn't go in, you see? It stops. You can't close the cylinder. That's the whole idea. If you jam this in there hard, it gets stuck because there is a constriction where the end of the chamber is. And Smith & Wesson made it so you cannot chamber the brass. However, the 454 Casull round is a heavy kicking round. When you have 65,000 psi equal to Magnum rifle, you need to have a good crimp. So when you crimp the round, it bends the case mouth in a little bit, and that crimp, which is essential, allows the round to chamber. And Smith & Wesson did not allow for that, whereas the other gun manufacturers did, such as Ruger. You see, doesn't go in. So you can't get that to work, even when it's crimped. And if you try and put a regular size brass casing in, it doesn't go in either, but it doesn't go in, it's even more sticking out. Because they made it so that you cannot put a crimped round into the chamber. And Beretta's the same way. I suspect all the other .45 Colt manufacturers are the same way. But Smith & Wesson, for some unbeknownst reason, which you would think they would know, in other words, they didn't do as good a job as Ruger or Beretta, how could they let that happen? After all, Smith & Wesson's only been making revolvers since when? The 1880s? And by the way, this condition where you allow a crimped round to chamber where an uncrimped round will not chamber, that's even more unsafe, because when you have that problem with a crimp, the pressures will actually spike more, resulting in an even more unsafe condition because of this. If Smith & Wesson were on their game at some point along the way, they would have realized this problem. And the later versions of the Model 25 would not take the .454 rounds because they would have corrected that. And whether they made an announcement or not doesn't matter. They probably would have not made any announcements because they don't want to admit any liability problems on earlier versions. But the thing is, they would have made a correction for our sake. So it'd be interesting if any of you out there have a late Model 25 Smith & Wesson, get a hold of a .454 round and see if it chambers. And if it doesn't, it means that Smith & Wesson at least was responsible to have corrected the issue without any notoriety. That's okay, but correct the issue. If the current Model 25s still will chamber the .454 Casull with the bursting popularity of the .454 Casull and the .460 Smith & Wesson, of Smith & Wesson's own making, by the way, more shooters will be having these and more possibilities of getting that ammo into this gun and then disassembling this gun at the range without the option of the shooter wanting to do that. So again, it'd be interesting, all of you out there who own Model 25s, you may not have any .454 Cazulls around, and that would be to your good fortune. But if you do, try to chamber and see if it's a common problem with these guns. And especially those of you out there who own a late Model 25, it'd be very interesting to see if this condition exists in your iteration of the Model 25 Smith & Wesson. So take care out there. We need to know about this and be aware of it, and that's the first step in not having any problems and being safe. Bye for now.